Welcome to those of you who have joined us. I should say this evening if you are in London, this afternoon for those of you who are joining us from the United States, or perhaps the middle of the night if you're in Asia. It is a tremendous honor to be able to host today's panel on 2020 US presidential elections and the state of the nation. I'm Leslie Vinjamore, direct the US and Americas program here at Chatham House. As you know, this is our centenary year. We are 100 years old. I think we celebrated our anniversary week the week before last. It was quite a week. This is really, I would say, we've been focused very much on America and its role in the world for most of the 100 years that Chatham House has been around, but especially in the last handful of years. And I think this, in many ways, signifies our really our focus at the beginning of our very deep engagement on this question of the US November election, where things are going, and very importantly, because of course of where we sit, what it means for the United Kingdom, what it means for Europe, what it means for the rest of the world. It's very difficult to imagine two people better qualified to talk about US politics and the view from abroad than Amy Walter and Adam Boulton. I'm so excited. I have to say, this is, of all the events I've chaired, this is one that I've been looking forward to the most. I last met Amy at the Cheltenham Literary Festival when Robin Niblett invited me, and sort of, it was a terrific panel with many people shoulder to shoulder in the same room. We will return to those days, and this is a pretty good substitute. Thank you, Amy, for taking the time. Amy Walter is well known to any of you who follow U.S. politics. She is a national editor of the Cook Political Report. She is a very well-known broadcaster, journalist, speaker on NBC, Meet the Press, CBS, Face the Nation, Fox News Sunday. She runs, obviously, a lot of the work for the Cook Political Report. We all follow you, Amy, and we listen to you, and we take the pulse of America based on your Twitter feed and what you tell us. So this is exciting for us. Thank you. We then have Adam Boulton, obviously very well known to everybody, and especially to our London audience, who is the presenter of All Out Politics. Many of us have been grilled by you. It's great to have you on the panel rather than in the moderating seat. You are also editor at large for Sky News, and you were also at the Cheltenham Literary Festival probably several times, but that same year that Amy was there, hence are revisiting that moment. Amy, I'm going to start with you. We have these elections coming up. Everybody always talks about the US presidential elections. In the last several years, people have even been talking about the US midterm elections. The amount of focus on what is going on internally within the United States, whether it's Supreme Court justice confirmation processes or Black Lives Matter, healthcare even, the amount of focus on the internal social, economic, and political changes in the United States is hard to understate for those of us sitting in Europe and the UK compared to past moments. So is it safe to say, we were told this is an election that will be a referendum on Donald Trump. We understand, the broad outlines of the state of things in the United States, tens of millions of people unemployed, so many Americans that have died, that are facing a very grave health crisis on a daily basis, that are worried about sending their children to school in the autumn, and that are facing a really difficult, what feels like a trade-off between their health, the economy, the education of their families. So it feels like there's a lot at stake. So tell us, do you believe the polls? Where is it going? Is it really a slam dunk for Joe Biden? What's at stake in this race? And what should we be thinking about over the next several weeks as we approach November?
Leslie, thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. I really look forward to getting questions too at the end of this. And it's good to see Adam again. I think we enjoyed a dinner as well in Cheltenham. So I wish we could be enjoying maybe cocktails after this, but alas, we'll just have to wait for the next time we can see each other in person. Here's how I would put the state of the race today. We're almost just a little bit over 100 days out from Election Day. And earlier this year, we were saying that while the president was something of a slight underdog, there were still opportunities for him to win the election. He was an underdog in large part based on things of his own making. Even though the economy, if you look back in January, was chugging along quite well, voters were feeling incredibly confident about the state of the economy, but it wasn't translating into their opinions of the president. This president is the first in American history, at least since the Gallup organization has done polling all the way back in the 50s, to never hit a 50% approval rating. This is a president who came into office winning just 46% of the popular vote, and during his tenure as president didn't seem particularly interested in broadening his base. He was interested in deepening it, getting more people who he believes are out there. Maybe they didn't show up in 2016, but they live in a lot of these battleground states, especially in the Midwest, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. They're there, they agree with Trump on the issues. They kind of like his brash style that turns off so many other Americans. And that was sort of the hope that this is where the campaign would be fought, really very much on the edges, another very close, very, very competitive contest. But three things have happened since then. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic. We had the killing of George Floyd, the African-American man in Minneapolis, who was killed by a police officer, and the protests that have since followed, and the racial reckoning going on in the United States. And the third is the fact that Bernie Sanders did not win the Democratic nomination. I think those three things are what really changed the trajectory of this race. And there are three things that Donald Trump really at this moment can't control, which also makes things very different than they were in 2016. In 2016, Donald Trump was an outsider. He was an agitator and a disruptor. And that was a message that resonated with a lot of folks, even those folks who maybe they'd voted for Barack Obama in a previous election. Maybe they hadn't been traditional Republicans. They just had been sort of tuning them out because whatever Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan or some of those other Republican leaders were saying just didn't really connect with them. This idea of a guy who comes from outside of politics, who's going to go in and break up the mess in Washington, a mess that had been created by both sides, the establishment just scratching each other's back. So there was an appeal to that. And there was also the fact that he was running against 8 years of Democratic control of the White House. And his opponent, Hillary Clinton, was the embodiment of establishment politics. And of course, came with a lot of controversy in her from all of her years in Washington. So all those things, I think, were very beneficial to him. And it was also a pretty, when you think about the environment at that time, the political, social, cultural, economic environment at that time, it was pretty placid, right? And so you could see the discussion about the campaign changing based on whatever, and it usually was then candidate Trump, whatever Trump was doing, whatever controversies he was throwing out there, whether it was a ban on all Muslims into the United States, whether it was attacking certain people associated with the Hillary Clinton campaign, cheering on WikiLeaks, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the distraction doesn't work so well when Americans are saying, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we don't know what to do. As you pointed out, Leslie, Americans are really stressed right now thinking about the upcoming school year. As a parent myself, I find myself, I think like almost every parent saying, I desperately want, and oh my gosh, do I need my kid to go back to school for me to get anything done? And for him to have some semblance of normalcy in his life. But I don't know what to think. I don't know if this is safe or not. And if he does go, is he going to get other people in our family sick? So it's all of that angst is a problem. And the president has seen his approval ratings on handling the virus continually trend down since March. I mean, there was a very small moment right at the beginning of this pandemic, where it looked like the president might get that rally around the flag effect that presidents do get at times of crisis. But it was a very small blip and it was very short-lived. And now about 2/3 of Americans say they don't trust the president on handling this. Joe Biden gets an 11-point advantage in some polls on his handling of this. Even more so, the president's handling of the protests in this country have been widely panned. Only about 1/3 of Americans approve of how he's handled that and how he handles race relations. So the two most important issues in this country right now, and most top of mind, the president is seen as really failing on. And then finally, the Joe Biden effect cannot be understated. Joe Biden is a well-known person in American politics. He's been around American politics for almost 50 years, but opinions about him are not as deeply negative as they were about Hillary Clinton or as they currently are about Donald Trump. I went back and looked, and at this point in the campaign, opinions about Hillary Clinton, whether they liked her or they didn't like her, saw her favorably or unfavorably, were underwater by about 20 points. So more people disliked than liked her by 20 points. If you look at where Joe Biden is at this point, it's anywhere from a couple points to 5 points to a dozen points. And the intensity is not as strong as it was with Hillary Clinton. You can see that in polling, but you can also hear it when you talk to voters around the country, and they'll tell you, like, I don't know, there was just something about Hillary Clinton. I just couldn't. Joe Biden, he seems fine. Joe Biden doesn't generate a whole lot of enthusiasm, even from Democrats, but that's not the issue here. The issue really is Joe Biden seen as more threatening, more problematic, more disruptive than Donald Trump? Will he do a worse job than Donald Trump? And right now, voters believe that Joe Biden would be doing a better job on those two main issues. But the one issue that the president still has a slight advantage on is the issue of the economy. He's either up by a few points or a point or so over Joe Biden on the question of who do you think would do a better job handling the economy. But you've also seen the percentage of Americans who believe that about the president continue to decline as this coronavirus pandemic shows no signs of abating. Finally, to your questions about the polls and the real worries that I have going forward, it's important. I don't want to spend all time digging too deep into the weeds about 2016, but the national polls in 2016, as we came up to Election Day, had Hillary Clinton ahead anywhere from 1 to 3 points, and she ended up winning the national vote by 2 points. Of course, as you know, that's not how we elect presidents. We elect presidents by the Electoral College, by states, and some of the state polls were significantly off. But I think what we know at this point is a couple of things that make us feel a little bit better about the state of polling today. The first is those in the states have learned a lot of lessons from what went wrong in 2016 and have made some adjustments to that now. Two, I think we all accept and understand that polls are not predictive. They can give you an idea of where the race is headed, but they are not there to tell us exactly who's going to win and by what margin. And finally, the lead that Joe Biden has now is so much bigger than anything that Hillary Clinton ever had. And so even if the polls are off 3 or 4 or 5 points, it would mean that Joe Biden still has a pretty significant lead. What I think everybody is aware of course, is we still have 100 days. And I think in the course of the 100 days, what could change the trajectory of this race would be those 3 things we discussed. One, that somehow the COVID situation gets better. We go back to school. Nothing bad happens. People are feeling okay. The economy kind of gets back on its feet. Unclear if that's going to happen. 2, that these protests settle down as we get into the fall. Right now, we're seeing in many cities that is true, but in others, it's only been ramped up. And of course, that has created a standoff between the Trump administration, who now is sending in federal troops. They're almost like militia members into cities, including Portland, Oregon, talking about sending them into Chicago as well. And I think that's not going to be met with a ton of support. And it's already not been, but from the broader American public. And the third being something happens with Joe Biden. Right now, he has benefited a lot from the fact that he is out of the spotlight. Some of that is because Donald Trump refuses to cede the spotlight to anybody. If you want to run a negative campaign against someone, if you want to make them the focal point, you got to get out of the way. And the president doesn't like getting out of the way. He likes staying and occupying every single minute of every single news cycle. But Joe Biden still is not as well defined as some other candidates have been. And it means that there's a lot of pressure on him to perform extremely well when he does get that focus back on him. Who he picks for the vice president and how he does that and how that rollout looks, how he does in these debates, what happens at a virtual convention. These are going to be critically important, and a mess up from Joe Biden could have really big consequences. But as the final thing I'd say, the number one worry that I have is less about the polls, and it's more about what election day looks like. We know now that so many voters are worried about actually showing up at the polls. Poll workers don't feel confident about it. Polling places are being closed down because many of them in this country are headquartered in places like senior centers and schools. And so there's a potential then for much more voting happening by mail, early voting, which is going to raise a whole lot of questions about whether states are prepared to be able to effectively and efficiently count those ballots, and how long it may take for the final count to be known. We've seen already in these primaries, because so many people are voting by mail, it takes these states a while. There's nothing nefarious about it. It just takes a long time to count those ballots, and to do it in a way that's fair and safe. And what is going to happen when we don't have a winner announced on election night? That could be a vacuum that unfortunately I think gets filled with a lot of nefarious activity. And there we go. Leave it at that.
Amy, that was great. We have so many questions for you. Let me ask you one quick question and then turn it over to Adam, and maybe it's a segue to Adam's remarks, since he's watching the US and has long watched the US, but from London. We spend a lot of time talking about trade. We talk about China incessantly. We talk about America's role in the world. We talk about immigration up and down on that conversation, I would say. And we know the standard line that foreign policy doesn't feature in America's minds when they turn up at the polls. It doesn't drive them to the polls. It doesn't turn up when they're at the polls. Is that true? Is there any chance that things are different right now because of the coronavirus, the origins, the alleged cover-up, the blame game with respect to China, the questions of trade? Has it changed the role of foreign policy in the election, in your view?
I don't think it's changed the role of foreign policy, but I do think that it has re-emphasized something that's been around in American politics for quite some time, and both sides have engaged in it, which is China bashing. And whether it was on, in the past, trade, cheating, stealing technology, the human rights abuses, it is now, and especially among Republicans, being used as a scapegoat. The only reason we have a coronavirus outbreak is started in China. Maybe the Chinese actually did this on purpose, right? There are many conspiracy theories out there that are circulating in this country about that. But even if you don't believe they did it on purpose, what Republicans are saying is, we do know it was their fault. They lied to us about it. And now we have to deal with this, and China should pay in some way. Now, whether that means they're going to pay by, we bring more American jobs home, that we no longer have this outsourcing. Again, you're seeing in some cases both Democrats and Republicans questioning the ways in which China has become much too integrated into our business models in this country and the way that we get products into the country. So I think that in that sense, you will see foreign policy, or what we want to call it, the rest of the world being a place here. But we are in a very, the U.S. is always self-centered when it comes to pretty much everything that we do. And I think now, especially with this coronavirus and protests and race, that's going to take up all bandwidth for voters.
Thank you. We have questions already. We're going to have a lot for you, but let's come to you, Adam. The view from abroad, the view from the UK. Has the UK given up on the United States? How much does this election matter to your viewers, to the people you talk with, to you? We look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Lee Leslie, and congratulations on Chatham House's centenary, and also very difficult to follow Amy, who, as ever, has pretty much covered all the ground. I think, the first thing to say is that this is the most, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, but I think as far as the rest of the world is concerned, it's probably the most consequential scheduled political event of 2020. You only have to look at what's been going on today with the visit of Secretary of State Pompeo to see that British political classes still care very, very much about America, still care about the special relationship, whether it exists or not. And of course, I would say that for this country, particularly at a time when we're leaving the European Union, that there is a big difference, even if Joe Biden sort of continues the sort of benign detachment on foreign policy that he had as vice president under Obama. There is a great deal of difference between that and where the Trump administration has ended up in an America First nationalist stance, which amongst other things has pretty much made it impossible for multilateral institutions to function effectively. And of course, our membership of those institutions is very important to us. Now, I'm sort of conscious, really, of having talked about this before at Cheltenham and some of the things I said, which never came to anything. I mean, for example, for this cycle, I was predicting that maybe one of the Democratic unknowns would come through the middle. Well, who remembers Pete Buttigieg, let alone some of the more obscure businessmen that I was perhaps tipping. So, I'm very shy on that front. I'm shy looking at the distinguished audience who clearly know much more about all this than I do. And of course, I'm shy because this year, my calendar was filled with various trips to the United States. If everything had gone according to plan, round about now, we'd be digesting the Democratic convention in Wisconsin, discussing who Joe Biden had chosen as his running mate and all the rest. Instead of which, we're looking forward to those events largely happening virtually. I noticed that Jacksonville doesn't seem particularly keen about hosting a Republican convention as coronavirus appears to spike in the state of Florida. So that may all be virtual. And I think this does have an effect. Amy's already said how possibly it will benefit Joe Biden because there's been less scrutiny on him. He hasn't had to be on the campaign trail, constantly delivering stump speeches, which, we know from experience is not his strong point. And of course, it's also deprived Trump of the big rallies of his supporters, which he thrives on. So that means, I think, that the issue in this election campaign is Donald Trump more than anything else, and that's borne out by 3/4 of both Republican and Democratic voters saying that. And in a sense, the longer it is, the better probably it's going to be for Joe Biden, given Donald Trump's present run of form. But what it also means, I think, is that it's going to be very difficult for either candidate, much more difficult for them to turn the campaign in one direction or another. In a sense, they're going to be at the mercy of events which break through onto the public consciousness through the mainstream media and social media. So really, you know, if you look at it, maybe the conventions are going to have a bit of an influence. I think what will definitely have a big influence on public opinion will be the vice presidential choices, of which more in a moment. And then, of course, we're going to have what are currently scheduled to be 3 presidential debates, you know, starting at the end of September. But, you know, the problem there for Biden is, just supposing the first debate goes badly. I mean, I know historically the incumbent tends to do worse in the first debate, but suppose the first debate goes very badly for Biden, he has a meltdown of some sort. Who would trust Trump to turn up for another 2 rounds if he's got Biden where he wants it? So that, you know, what I think we should focus on is you know, perhaps the wild cards that could emerge over the next 100 days, or just over 60 days, I think, and still some states start early voting. And obviously, as Amy's pointed out, we've got coronavirus and Black Lives Matter being, you know, 2 things which have completely knocked this election campaign out of kilter, not least because they've completely changed the outlook of the economy, as has happened in this country and globally, and also, of course, because they put a focus on Trump's competence or incompetence, which perhaps in normal times he was able to elide. That said, of course, I mean, I think anyone who's seen the recent documentaries about Hillary Clinton will be reminded that October surprises can emerge, can make all the difference. Comey reopening the investigation, Wiener getting in trouble. I mean, all those things can happen. And my guess is, if it gets desperate, the Trump campaign will try to engineer some fairly major shocks that may not stand the test of time. And then, you know, there are bizarre things. As far as I can tell, Kanye West hasn't quite withdrawn from the contest as yet. Potentially, you can see how he might end up being a drain of votes in some key states. But who knows? But let's look forward to the next sort of thing on the character, the vice presidential choices. Now, as someone who ran a sweepstake once at the Republican convention on George W. Bush's running mate, where the last ticket to go, on George Sr.'s running, George Bush Sr.'s campaign, where the last ticket to go was Dan Quayle. I'm not going to make any predictions as to who's going to be chosen, but let's look at the options. Biden has suggested, has said that he's going to elect a woman, choose a woman as his running mate, and there have been suggestions that might be a woman of color. Now, you know, you might say goes for Kamala Harris, that would be a fairly neutral choice. On the other hand, if he doesn't go for a woman of color, does that leave the option open for Trump to try and pull one back, to dump Mike Pence, and maybe adopt, you know, someone like Nikki Haley, or I think, although one of my colleagues was suggesting Candace Owens, the outspoken black commentator, might be the person for him to go for, but I think she's disqualified by her age. She's only 31, and presumably a vice president has to be capable of becoming president. But conversely, what happens if Biden were to decide or to persuade Michelle Obama to be his running mate? How would that change the tone of the campaign? Again, she said that she's not particularly keen, but I think it's clear that all those things could change the campaign, in which, you know, the big point is, in spite of attempts to impeach him, in spite of the American disaster of coronavirus, Donald Trump is still standing. He's maybe around 40%. He's not going to get a lot higher. And while the polls give Joe Biden national leads of between 8% and maybe double that, it's also pretty clear that the Democratic vote tends to be more squeezable and less reliable than the Republican vote, so that it's probably, even in national polls, a lot closer than that. And putting together, Amy's Cook report and the 538 website, I notice that, we should also be looking, if we're talking about consequences, about what's going to happen in the congressional races. Because we could have a President Biden who ends up being like President Obama, effectively spavined by a Republican Senate and possibly a Republican Congress. Well, the Congress looks unlikely, but as I say, putting together the Cook report and the 538 website, we've probably got half a dozen states where the Democrats, if it's a really bad time for Donald Trump, could pick up Senate seats. And in those circumstances, the Republicans are defending more. In those circumstances, a Biden victory would be truly transformative. But I do think beneath the issue of Donald Trump, this is probably an election about things which, in reflection, in our Anglo-Saxon culture, we've also been dealing with, not just Black Lives Matter, but also Me Too, and whether those causes which arouse a great deal of passion are actually going to mean that people turn out and vote. I mean, we've now got a situation where 2/3 of Americans say, for example, that they agree with Black Lives Matter. But we would have to confess that probably in the American electorate, there's a bit of a resistance to both women and people of color. And it remains an option for Donald Trump, as Mr. Tomasky put it in a piece he wrote yesterday, to go for race as the polarizing issue, which could give him maybe just enough votes, remember he only won by 78,000 in 3 states, of fearful voters, fearful that America is changing away from them, could just put him over the top. And we know that he's had his stances during Black Lives Matter, but in the past he wanted to build a wall against the Mexicans. He just about founded the birther movement about Barack Obama, and of course he called for the death penalty for the Central Park Five. So it could, I think, get extremely nasty as we close towards the polls. And that is before you look at Biden, who's an interesting character. He's a sort of archetypal American senator, isn't he? But in this country, he would have never recovered from plagiarizing Neil Kinnock's speech about being the first Kinnock or Biden in 1,000 years to go to college. But he has that sort of solidity which Americans seem to admire. And just, Amy touched on it, but just to end, we do have the possibility of a contested result. It's quite clear that there's fairly well organized voter suppression by a number of Republican state managers. On top of that, we've already got Trump insisting that voting by mail, postal voting equates with fraud. So, if he loses narrowly, if they're having to go, most importantly, as Amy said, to counting mail votes, will he be prepared to concede, or will he, you may have seen the nightmare scenario laid out by Jonathan Friedland this week, would he attempt to seize the presidency effectively by paralyzing the Electoral College or disqualifying those states where votes are still in dispute? I think he's a man who's shown extraordinary vanity and extraordinary willingness to break the rules. So I don't think it'll be over until the very end. I have to say, I'll end on this note. One friend of mine, and we're already seeing, I think that he's looking for ways that he can protect his exit with his pardon for Roger Stone. But one of the rather sobering things that one of my friends in Washington said, I said, well, what happens if Trump refuses to go? And their reply was, after all the generals he's alienated, the military wouldn't stand for it. But if I was an American, I wouldn't find that an altogether attractive prospect.
Thank you, Adam. There was a lot in there. I'm going to have to ask Amy one follow-up question and then go straight to the questions. It's a three-part question, but I think Adam raised three issues that I think you're going to want to comment on. One is the vice presidential candidate. Who should Biden choose and who will he choose? The second is Congress. And the third is, do culture wars work? Does the July 4th speech, does that actually work? Does that pull voters? I mean, I have to say I'm skeptical, but Adam said a few things there that I think you will probably want to respond to. So over to you, and then we'll go straight out to the questions. I'm going to ask everybody, remember that we are on the record, we are recording, and I absolutely hope that you will speak your question rather than just write it. So I'm going to call on those of you. When I do, please unmute and say your name, your affiliation, if you would like, and your question. But back to you, Amy.
All right, so let's start with, I'll go backwards maybe, because I can remember that easier. So is the culture war going to work? It obviously was quite effective for Donald Trump in 2016, but again, the world was a lot different in 2016, and his opponent was a lot different. The first thing that's challenging, as I said, is that it's Joe Biden as the nominee, not Elizabeth Warren, not Bernie Sanders, not Hillary Clinton. Voters may believe a lot of things about Joe Biden, but that he's some left-wing socialist anarchist is not something that is believable. So that is challenge number one for him. Challenge number two, when only 30% of Americans think that the president is handling race relations well, he is a terrible messenger this year on culture and on race. Number three, there has been a tremendous movement in the way that white voters in this country view race, how they view Black Lives Matter, how they view discrimination. It's been a tremendous, it's not 180 degrees, but tremendous movement in support of a lot of the things that Donald Trump is coming out against, like getting rid of Confederate statues, or at least finding another place for them to be rather than in the public square. And finally, the suburban vote, and we saw this in 2018, where these are voters mostly in and around big metropolitan areas, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, that had been voting Republican pretty consistently over the years. But Donald Trump's culture wars in and of themselves alienated those voters. And those suburbs that I think the president still imagines them, how they looked in the 1950s, which were basically all white and filled with white people who were fleeing cities that they feared were becoming overridden by crime and integration of schools. Those folks, that's not who these suburban voters are. These suburban voters in a place like suburban Atlanta, a county outside of Atlanta that just 10 years ago? 8 years ago was 2012, voted for Mitt Romney by 10 points. In this last election, this county, Gwinnett County, voted for the Democratic African-American woman running for governor by 15 points. So a 24-point shift in that district, driven some part by the fact that it is majority now non-white, but also that white voters and their perceptions of race have changed. So that's number three. Number two, as to who he picks, I agree with Adam that in many ways, picking Kamala Harris is the most conservative choice he can make, meaning this is a guy who is sitting on a big lead right now. He doesn't need to do anything to shake things up. He doesn't need a Hail Mary. He doesn't need to try to change the trajectory of this race. The more even he keeps it and even keeled he keeps it, the better. I think she provides two things for Democratic voters who think that Joe Biden is kind of a throwback. He's too old. He's old school. He's got a record on race over the years that's less than ideal. Kamala Harris, as a female, as an African-American woman, gives those voters something to vote for, right? They may not love Joe Biden, but he is putting on his ticket and essentially putting at the front of the queue for who will be the Democratic nominee next time around, an African-American woman. And I think to voters out there who are wary of Joe Biden because, again, he's kind of too old, if anything happens to him, who's next in line? To pick somebody who has federal experience in the Senate, and then she was the state attorney general in California, a very big state, a very big job. So she looks like she's filled that. And I can't remember what the other question was.
Congress.
Adam's right, too, that the race for the Senate is now taking center stage. Democrats would need to net 3 seats at this point in order to take over control of the Senate. They have put at least half a dozen, but actually probably more than that. Let's say 7, 8 seats in play, whereas Republicans have really just one opportunity to pick off a Democratic seat. It's going to be very competitive, and this is why it matters for Joe Biden to go and do well, not just in those states that Hillary Clinton narrowly lost, but to really compete in places like Georgia and North Carolina, Arizona, Iowa, because that's where the race for the Senate will be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, lots of questions here. I'm going to come to Jeremy, Trisha, and Sean all together, because I think there's a grouping here of questions, and then we'll come right back out to Kate and Alex. So Jeremy.
I was going to ask about Arizona and Texas, because there seems to be a big shift towards the Democrats in those states. Is that a result of urbanization or Hispanic voters increasing in numbers, do you think?
And Jeremy, can you tell us, before you answer that, where are you affiliated? Just, it's great for us to know.
Affiliated politically, or?
No. It's okay. We love to hear where people are from, but you don't have to say. Trisha, you're up next. And then Sean Curtin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Hi, Trisha de Bourgrave. I'm a freelance writer. You've answered pretty much the sort of running mate question there. Obviously, there's so many imponderables. But I wanted to ask Amy about the TikTok incident that happened at the Oklahoma rally. And that was a real sense of kind of the youth of America kind of playing a role here. How much is that going to factor in? How much is it democratic, let's say, anti-Trump? And also I just went on the debates. There's, Tom Friedman wrote this piece about the fact that, if the debates are to happen, because it is a worrying aspect in terms of the performance that Biden can put into this. He's not looking 100%, strong. And, we're all in the kind of keep it boring Biden thing because it's worked very well so far. But is there a possibility, how much of an outside chance is there for his suggestion, for Friedman's suggestion of putting in a sort of fact-checking format so that I think he said like every 20 minutes it can be checked. Otherwise, Biden's going to just spend the entire time saying, no, that's not true, no, that's not right. Do you have any idea of what's happening around the debate thing and obviously on the TikTok and the youth vote? Thank you.
That's actually a lot, so let me stop there and come back to you. Adam, do you want to have a go? Or maybe we'll come to Amy first and then to you, Adam, and then we'll come right back out because we've got lots of questions here. Amy.
So start with Arizona and Texas. Yeah. It's a very good question. Yes, there are two things happening. One is, of course, these are states that are becoming increasingly non-white, have very significant Latino population. But what we're also seeing, especially in Arizona, and this is why Arizona is so competitive, Arizona is basically Phoenix and suburbs, and then not much else. So it's kind of like Nevada's Las Vegas and Las Vegas suburbs and not much else. And so to win Arizona, if you win the county that Phoenix is in, Maricopa, you win the state. What we're seeing in places like Maricopa, in these suburbs in and around Phoenix and Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and Austin, are suburban voters who are really turned off by Donald Trump. And so the question that a lot of us here are asking is not whether Donald Trump can win those voters over. I don't think he can. Are these voters now going to be permanently aligned with Democrats? Have they moved for good? Or are Democrats just winning them over because they hate Donald Trump? And once Democrats get in charge and they overreach and they, decide to pursue issues that look too far to the left, those voters are going to go back to their Republican roots. For the debates, I don't know what's going to happen with these debates. We know we have 3 of them set. My thinking is they will be done in, and should be done probably without a studio audience. Maybe they're done just in a sound stage. I don't know if any college campuses are going to want, normally they do love having the media and everybody descend on their campus for these events. I doubt that they're going to allow that to happen this year. Listen, the debates, I think you're exactly right. Joe Biden does have to show a level of competence, consistency, strength, durability. If you saw the debates early on the Democratic side, Joe Biden was shaky at best. I think that's another challenge for him, not being on the campaign trail. In one way, it is helping him to keep well rested, not get overextended. At the same time, he's not had a lot of practice. So you're literally going from 0 to 60. That's going to be a big challenge for him, much more so than the president, who's always on. For the fact-checking piece, look, I think the difference, again, between now and then is it's Donald Trump who has to defend his record in office. In 2016, he was on offense all the time, understandably, because it was 8 years of Democratic rule that he was criticizing. Now he has to respond to questions about how he's handled a whole bunch of issues since he's been president. And as for young voters, they are very important. We know that they're not as enthusiastic about Joe Biden as they were about, say, Barack Obama. But every campaign and every candidate puts together a different coalition. Nobody else can put together the Barack Obama coalition except Barack Obama. Joe Biden has a Joe Biden coalition that is older. He's getting a lot of older voters who I think have also been turned off by the handling of the coronavirus by the president. And he's winning over more suburban voters than previous Democratic candidates have. So while he does need to get younger voters out and voting, the reliance on them, this idea that he needs to hit Barack Obama numbers, I don't think is something that is important.
Adam, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I do. Just a couple of points. I mean, I've been involved trying to organise debates, or I've been involved in debates on both sides of the Atlantic. I wouldn't worry about fact-checking. I mean, with digital technology these days, everything is going to be fact-checked in real time. But I don't think it'd be practical for moderators to stop every 15 minutes and award points, not least because in a fake news environment, if they did that, they could equally well offer hostages to fortune if they ruled against the president and then it was able to argue that actually he was right. I think there'll be a great deal of fact-checking. But I mean, the one point I'd make about Trump is he's someone who's, completely transcended facts. You only have to look at his performance with Chris Wallace on Fox this weekend, where he claimed that America has the #1 lowest mortality rate on coronavirus. That's demonstrably untrue. yet he claimed it and also claimed he produced a piece of paper to back it up. As far as Texas goes, I think this does raise one interesting point we haven't mentioned so far, is the extent to which surrogates for Biden will get out in their own areas. And the evidence that I've read, obviously I haven't been to Texas, is that Beto O'Rourke and his network are proving pretty effective in Texas in mobilizing Democratic support. Of course, as in every election, the turnout and which groups turn out are going to make a great deal of difference. So, can you convert the TikTokers into people who go out and vote in large numbers in swing states? I think that's an open question. And again, it perhaps raises the question of what AOC or indeed Bernie Sanders say about getting out and supporting Biden. We'll have to wait and see about that, because they follow them. I mean, as far as Arizona goes, or indeed, most states, but those states in particular where there's an elderly population, polling does suggest that perhaps spooked by COVID, Trump is losing, has lost the levels of support he had 4 years ago. But it may be that this helps Biden in the abstention column rather than in the vote column. I mean, I've certainly had anecdotally quite a lot of Americans with elderly parents who voted Trump last time who are saying Trump never again, but they're not people who are particularly inclined to go all the way across and vote for the Democrats.
Okay, we're going to go right back out. We have Kate Yarrington, David Manning, and John Prideaux. Kate, are you with us? Unmuted?
Hello, I'm unmuted. I do have small children in the background, so my apologies. Okay. So, as happened in 2016, Trump has been telling supporters that if he loses the election, it will be fraudulent, the result will be invalid. What are the chances of him refusing to stand down, and what could happen next? Is there a risk of civil unrest, given the number of weapons that Americans have? And Adam's comments on the generals as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go straight to John and then David. John Prideaux with The Economist. Are you with us, John?
First of all, Leslie, thank you for doing this. These sessions have been amazing during lockdown. And to Amy, hi. I'm the US editor of The Economist, and I'm a super fan of your work at Political. I think you've answered the question I had about the Senate, but so I'll ask a slightly different question, if that's okay. On voter suppression, which Adam raised, clearly as a kind of normative question, voter suppression is really important, right? In a healthy democracy, it's bad for a political party to attempt to suppress the vote. But I was wondering in practical terms, do you think voter suppression is kind of overweighted by journalists as a potential factor in this election? Pretty much all the political science I've read suggests that its impact is small.
Let me come to Sean Curtin, who's reminded me that I forgot to give him his question, and then we'll come back to the speakers. And actually, no, Sean, go for it. I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Amy and Adam, for your very interesting analysis. Adam, you certainly got us fired up with your scenarios of Trump dumping Mike Pence, probably rather unlikely. My question is a twofold. We talked about Kamala Harris as a potential vice president, but what about Tammy Duckworth? Wouldn't she actually be more beneficial to get that sort of military vote onto Biden's side? And my second question is just that at the moment, Trump is blaming China for his poor handling of the coronavirus pandemic. And that's obviously having consequences here in the UK. But I noticed that Biden has said that the reason why China imposed the security law in Hong Kong was because Trump's been too weak on China. So that suggests to me that there's going to be a race between the two candidates to bash China. And what do you think the likely effect will be on UK-China relations? Thanks.
That's a big question, certainly a topic for the week. And there's also, do domestic voters, do voters in the US distinguish? Do they really see the difference? Do they care about the difference on China? Adam, do you want to take these first, or Amy? Amy, let's come to you. Voter suppression, holding on, Tammy Duckworth, and China.
Okay.
Choose.
And civil unrest. maybe I am too Pollyanna-ish here to believe that we could actually see something like a president, you know, like what we would see in a third world country of a president holed up in his residence with a militia surrounding him and crowds of protests out in the street. But I now take nothing for granted. So I am even willing to take this scenario in. What I think is more likely to happen, and again, a lot of it is going to depend on the size of a victory by Joe Biden, right? If this is, you know, a 320 electoral vote, 400 electoral vote versus one that is like we saw in 2016, down to 78,000 votes. I have no doubt that the president is going to argue that the way that people voted, whether by mail or early vote, or that people were voting illegally, standing in line. At one point during 2016, he said people were wearing masks, you know, like going to their car and putting on fake mustaches and hats to vote multiple times. So I have no doubt he's going to do that. What I worry about more is in that vacuum of time when we're seeing the states finalize the vote totals, that nefarious actors, especially Russia, gets onto, once again, the US social media sphere and starts to continue to spread these rumors, again, on both sides, right? That illegal aliens are stealing this, it's rigged, and you know, thousands and thousands of African-American voters' names were purged from the files. This is voter suppression at its worst, and you're going to get both sides then to stand up and say this election has been invalid. Whoever wins it, you know, we don't trust the process. We don't trust the person who won it. We don't trust the system itself. That is much, that is my really big fear. We already have a deep well of distrust in this country, well, quite frankly, across the world, of institutions. This would be just a very serious blow to the credibility of elections in this country. So I worry about that more. And the question about Tammy Duckworth, she is a very appealing person with an incredible story of heroism. This is a woman who was serving in the military. Her helicopter was shot down. She lost both of her legs in that accident. And she has shown a real penchant for sort of taking it to Donald Trump. But again, I think if you are looking for somebody, your Joe Biden, you really want to send a message, and with a Kamala Harris, which is to say, at this moment of deep racial reckoning, at this moment where a lot of folks, even on the left, are very skeptical about how serious Biden is to address a lot of these racial issues, I think having a woman of color would be more important for him.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that Donald Trump is not Al Gore. He's not someone who, if there is a contest to be had, who's going to go quietly. And in fact, his whole business record is, by and large, quite often to lose and then to go into the courts and try and emerge with some sort of victory. So I think for all those reasons, because possibly actually declaring a winner will be delayed because of counting postal votes, mail votes, and absentee ballots, I think it does leave room for him to dispute it. The point I was making about the military was simply the suspicion that the military would make sure that he went, not that they would be inclined particularly to defend him. As far as John Prideaux's point about voter suppression, does it affect the overall result of a presidential election? I'm not so sure. I suspect it can have quite a significant impact on individual congressional races. I mean, you know, what have we got in the Senate? We got, you know, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, North Carolina, all possibly with close races for various reasons, and voter suppression could make a difference. I mean, after all, if we go back to 2000, arguably successful attempts to make it difficult for African-American voters to get to the polls in Florida, and challenges to them actually contributed to Bush being able to carry the state. So I don't think, it's something that should be dismissed as a journalistic conceit, particularly since, there are such flagrant examples of it taking place. And as I made it clear, I'm not predicting who the vice presidential choices are going to be. But were it to be either Duckworth or Harris, I don't think Donald Trump is above effectively saying to the American electorate, Joe Biden will be 80 if he's in the White House, he'll die, and you'll end up with either a black or a disabled woman. I mean, I just think it's that kind of toxic.
Great. Okay. Greg Swenson, Susan Ambrishini. If you can say who you are, there's a lot on the table at this point. Greg.
Hi, thanks, Leslie. It's Greg Swenson. I'm an investment banker with Brigg McAdam and a frequent conservative commentator on television, including your show, Adam. Always nice to be on your show. A couple of issues. One is the enthusiasm gap. What do you think about the polls that say that the Biden voter is really not voting for Biden? He's just voting against Trump. Only 33% of Biden voters are actually voting for him versus Trump, where 76% are voting for Trump. So does that affect enthusiasm? And more importantly, does it affect turnout, which, given the inability, I think, for either candidate to sway, a lot of voters. I mean, most voters have made up their mind. So, does it become a turnout election, and does that enthusiasm gap matter? And then as far as the minority vote, the Republicans are running a lot of minority and woman candidates in the congressional races. So there might be a chance that this minority vote that Biden so depends on might shift a little. And if it moves anywhere, north of 12% for Trump in the African American vote, that could be a problem. And I point to Ron DeSantis in Florida, who won 18% of the African American woman vote, which basically swayed the election for Ron DeSantis in a 40,000 vote election. So is there some room for the suburban women and also minority women who don't see their children going back to school, and you see the Democrats capping charter schools at every turn, especially with the teachers' unions behind them? Is there some vulnerability in the suburban women vote because of schools?
I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I can see that Tina Fordham has a related question. So let me come to Tina and then to Susan. Tina, are you with us? If you unmute.
Yes, I've unmuted. Well, yes, in a similar vein, also as somebody who works as an advisor to investors and to corporate leaders, I worry too much about being invested in an airtight base case of a Biden victory. I share the concerns about the many wild cards and the extent of concern about the democratic legitimacy of the election. But I think that there's still time to factor in whether it's a gaffe by Biden, as was suggested, an October surprise that really does change the trend, or what about a vaccine emerging and the president being able to take credit for that? What would change the dynamics of this race?
And Susan, or Susan Schoenfeld, are you, if you unmute.
Hi, I'm unmuted. So a couple of quick questions for me. One of them is, I'm trying to get the video on too, I'm not sure if I can. So with respect to the new campaign manager for the Trump campaign, as the person was Chris Christie's Bridgegate facilitator, what do you see the impact of that being on this election? And how do you see Portland and what's been happening in Portland and potentially in Chicago? To me, it's fascism in the streets of America. I'm just curious how it's playing in the US. And lastly, in terms of the report that's about to come out about Russian interference in UK elections, so this is a question very much for the two of you. Do you see what could or should be coming out, maybe coming out in terms of Russian interference in British politics, potentially having an impact or giving us information about what's going to be happening in this election in the US?
I'm going to come to Alex and Brittany, and then I'm just going to come back to the two of you so that we can finish at 7:15. I know that's a lot of questions, so you can choose the the comments you want to make. But let me come to Alex, folks, and then to Brittany.
Hi, Leslie. Thank you very much indeed. There are reports today that a proportion of the US population that believes that the statistics about coronavirus are wrong is growing. In other words, that more people believe that the numbers are inflated. Do you believe, to use Amy's terminology, that this is a broadening or a deepening effect? And do you believe that the virus will start to come off the table as a key issue for the election?
And Brittany.
Thank you, Leslie, for hosting the show, for hosting this event today. And thank you so much to Alex and to Adam and Amy as well for sharing your thoughts. My name is Brittany and I work as an asset manager in the city. My question to the two of you is, given the 2010 and 2018 midterm elections, how important is the election of a US president in 2020, given the likelihood that the legislature, particularly the Senate, may possibly still be in Republican hands? Thank you.
So there's a lot there. I'm going to let Adam go first, and then we'll come to you last, Amy, because you've traveled the farthest through the land of internet to get to us. And also because you probably have somewhere you have to go next, since you're still in the middle of your day. Adam, you can choose. That's a lot on the table.
Okay, I'll try and go through quickly. As far as the midterm elections, yes, good point. Presidencies can get stymied. At the same time, as I tried to suggest at the beginning, I think the defeat or victory of Donald Trump will be extremely consequential. Another 4 years of Donald Trump. And I think our whole view of Western democracy and Western alliances will probably have been completely shattered. As far as Russia, I mean, we now have had the report published. It accepted as a given that there was Russian interference in the 2016 election, and nobody disputed that. Did that make any difference? I don't know. I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump, while he may have fallen out with President Xi, still hankers after a buddy relationship with President Putin, which really harks back to what I've just said about different views of what alliances can mean. I think I covered the issue of October surprises and the possibility in what I said earlier on. It could equally be an October surprise that explodes further in Donald Trump's face. I mean, we should remember that probably what really put the kibosh on McClain's campaign was when he made the decision to choose Sarah Palin as his running mate. And finally, on minority votes, I mean, Greg, who is a great participant on Sky and elsewhere, he makes a good point, except I think the last poll I saw of African Americans was something like 95% for Biden. So I'm not sure that those candidates are really swaying African Americans' view of Donald Trump, particularly since the events following the death of George Floyd have, I would argue, probably been much more prominent than who's actually on the ballot paper.
Amy, over to you for questions, last comments. Guide us forward.
So for last couple of things about what a Biden presidency without a Congress could do. Remember, even if Biden gets a Democratic Senate, it will not be 60 votes, which is what you need to prevent filibuster from the minority party. So the biggest question now circling around Washington is, if Democrats do indeed get the 50, 51, 52 seats to be in the majority, will they vote to get rid of a filibuster, which means that the president could get a lot done that previous presidents have not because of the 60 vote threshold. That's going to be a very big pressure point put on a new Democratic Senate. And if the Senate stays in Republican hands, remember, a lot of what this president has been able to get done is through executive orders. And so I think what you will see is Joe Biden with flourish every day rolling out a new example of something he overturned of Trump's from the Trump administration era, because not a lot has gone through a pure legislative process, especially in these last 2 years, but even in the first 2 years of Trump's presidency. You know, on the question that we're all wondering is what could change the trajectory? I think everybody has brought up really good points. Is it that there's a vaccine? Perhaps, but what we're already hearing and seeing is that it's unlikely that that vaccine is going to get into the hands of regular people anytime soon. And there's a real wariness about whether to trust whoever is trying to pitch this vaccine. We already have an American public that has been cool to other vaccines of recent years, and trying to get Americans to believe either the president or the CDC, both of whom have come under attack politically, is going to be challenging. I think the one other big wild card is a Supreme Court opening. And, you know, the fact that you could have a Supreme Court fight like we had on the eve of the 2018 election throws a huge wrench into a lot of assumptions about who's going to turn out and why they turn out and where they turn out. I don't know that it changes, though, the trajectory of the race. What we saw in 2018 was the fight over Kavanaugh, I think, helped Republicans in keeping control of the Senate. It basically helped to bring home and energize Republicans who were feeling sort of meh about the election. They got fired up by watching the way that they saw Brett Kavanaugh be treated by Democrats. But it didn't change the overall outcome of the election, especially in those suburban areas. Those voters still readily picked Democratic candidates. I think that was all that I kind of remember. Oh, and just in terms of African-American vote or campaign manager, African-American vote, and the other thing. The thing that I think everyone appreciates is that regardless of who Donald Trump hires, he is the ultimate decider. He is the spokesperson. He is the campaign manager. He is the chief of staff. So his gut instinct outranks, I guess, any other person or data point. So I think that's an important thing to remember. And as for what's happening in Portland and Chicago, I do see this as the potential of it having more of a backlash on the president than being something that actually helps him. This election feels very much like an election that Richard Nixon ran in 1968 against, you know, what was seen as lawlessness in the cities. You, of course, had riots breaking out and a lot of destruction across America's cities. That's not what's happening at this point. But it is happening within bubbles. And so I think, again, what the president is doing in highlighting Portland and Chicago, talking about violence and leftists and anarchists, he's doing all he can to get those Republicans who maybe aren't as excited as they once were about voting this election, to get them re-engaged. But it is not moving the kinds of voters that Trump thinks that he's moving.
That has been a tremendous hour and 15 minutes talking about the election that really does feel like it will be the election of a lifetime for all of us on the call. It's hard to understate, Amy, you have a very captive audience across the United States. Trust me, we follow you from over here too. It's hard to understate. Adam knows very well how much it matters to those of us in the UK and across the world, not only the Americans abroad, but all of us. So thank you for taking the time. We follow you. We know how busy you are. Adam, we see you every day, sometimes on your show, and it really has been terrific. If you all unmute and join me in a welcoming round of applause, a thanking round of applause, and please come back soon and engage with us.
Thank you all. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done.